plant scourges, a sampling of some of the most devastating crop pathogens. Fungal genus Fusarium infects crops as varied as wheat, corn, potatoes, melons, and coffee. Kind of staples. Up to 50 fungicide sprayings per season are needed in order to control this disease. Do you think those fungicides are healthy for people to eat on plants? These cost U.S. brewers billions of dollars in lost revenue each year. In the 1950s, Fusarium caused Panama disease, wiped out the Gros Michel banana, which was the primary cultivar at the time. Those bananas died off. If we didn't have other types of bananas out there, we would not be eating banana and peanut butter sandwiches. That's a problem. Late blight, which is caused by a fungus like oomycete Phytophthora infested, was the culprit behind the Great Potato Famine in Ireland in the 1840s. They're not some minor league players. The disease still causes $6 billion in damage to crops each year.
Are we just supposed to let all these plant species that we depend on die off? I mean, we joke about genetic engineering and people scoff at it saying we don't need it. But what is the truth? Genetic engineering, since the discovery of DNA in 1953, has been a staple in agriculture, and now it's becoming a staple in the food industry. I think people forget how vulnerable we really are. I mean, people portray scientists as these horrible people who are altering and messing with nature, but nature is trying to kill us. I mean, everything that we eat is getting infected. The bacteria and viruses are just too good at what they do for us to sit by idly and run out of food supply.
Genetic engineering is a hot topic today, but did you know it's been around since 1900s and before? Gregor Mendel, the monk who discovered genetics, inspired the first types of hybridization by using plants and how they look in order to create new generations that have more traits that we like. So people began to cross plants with two different types and making new types of plants that we had never seen before. This was the first time that we began to manipulate how the natural combination of red flowers make red flowers make red flowers. Well, if you bring in a white flower, we might be able to get pink flowers. And we realized people liked them. Genetic engineering is when we have a organism, could be bacteria, could be a plant, could be an animal, could be a fungus, that we want to modify. And say we want insecticide-resistant corn. If we know that wheat is naturally resistant to this type of insecticide by luck, let's say not engineering already, what we can do is find that gene that makes the wheat resistant, take it out of here, make copies, and put it into the corn and start growing the corn with this new gene that it never had. And if you've picked the right gene from here that was resistant, and you put it in here, these will also be resistant. Genetic engineering, you can either insert a gene from another plant or organism, and you can mutate a gene that's already there. So maybe the corn has the gene, but it no longer works, or you can delete it, so the corn crops after that point will be resistant just as they used to be in the past, or just as the wheat that you brought in, that one gene is. So you create stronger, more resistant crops that are able to survive and able to be used and produce food for millions of people.
Prime example of genetic engineering is corn. corn was selected for generation after generation for larger and larger kernels and is now giant compared to what it used to be in the corn we know and eat today. One of the major successes in GE was the introduction of seedless fruits and vegetables. Everyone disliked eating watermelon seeds, and so they were able to find the genes that controlled seed production and turn them off. Now we all enjoy seedless watermelon and clementines.
There are several ways that scientists can genetically engineer an organism. Here they are. First, they can take the DNA that they want to put in, say, into the corn. They can take the DNA that they found from the wheat that is resistant to insecticides, and they can take that one gene from the wheat, attach it to a virus. Viruses are amazing at infiltrating our cells. We take out the genetic information of the virus and instead put in the gene you want it to put into your cells, and the virus will do the work for you, something they've been doing for millions of years, and take the DNA that you want and put it into the cell. A GMO is an organism whose genetic material has been altered using GE techniques. Now, GMOs aren't just in plants, but of course, GMOs in food get a lot of attention because these are things we put into our bodies. But other things that have been genetically modified include bacteria, yeast, insects, plants, fish, cnidarians, those are jellyfish and things, and mammals, of course. So let's talk about those. Bacteria are the first organisms modified because of their simple genetics. An example of this is bacteria have been used to create human proteins for medicine. So insulin, so diabetes is a huge problem. There's type 1 and type 2. If people do not make enough insulin, we know that they have to get injections of insulin, right? But where does that insulin come from? Have you ever thought about that? Well, they figured out a way so that we don't have to have human farms of making insulin where we wait for people to produce it and then pull it out of them and give it to somebody else. What kind of life is that? So we figured out a way to have bacteria make insulin for us, so it's not synthetic, it's real insulin, and then we can give it to people who have diabetes. Insects have also been genetically modified. We have mosquitoes that have been released into the wild that are resistant to malaria, so that way they can no longer spread malaria, which is a huge problem. In 2008 alone, it killed 1 million people. More genetically modified organisms include plants. So this is the big one because these are the things that we eat and are readily available on the market today. So Monsanto was the first to genetically modify plants, and this was in 1983. This is not new stuff. And then of course, there's a lot of genetically modification research and things going on with mammals. Now we don't really have a lot of these on the market for meat and things. They're mostly used in research for studying human disease because we are mammals, so other mammals are very similar to us. In 1992, the US FDA declared that genetically engineered food was not any more dangerous than regular food, and so it was not given its own regulatory status. Genetically modified organisms aren't just used for food, they're also used to produce goods. Some of these include pharmaceutical drugs, experimental medicines, agriculture, human proteins for medicine, biofuels, and enzymes that we use to make food. Now, a lot of people are concerned about the risks associated with using genetically modified or genetically engineering things, especially in food. Now, hopefully you would think we're not eating things that are risky, they're not massively available without being tested. So of course all these things have been tested, and the US FDA did rule that there's no greater risk to any of these organisms or food items produced as a result of genetically modified organisms than regular food. So everything in moderation. One thing is there's a huge difference between the USA regulation and European regulation of GMs. So Europe has a lot of regulations on producing in Europe versus importing into Europe. And they have a lot of regulations on production, but they still import all the things that we make as a result of GMOs and genetic engineering. So don't think, oh, Europe outlawed this. What do they know that we don't? Well, we have a huge scientific industry, and so we're making all these things, and so we send it to them. So they don't need to make it. They don't need to take the risk to make it because somebody else already is. But don't go thinking that they're not using GMs, because they are. Some groups say that there are unanswered questions on the long-term impacts of genetically modified organisms and their products. So we didn't know about DNA till 1953, so that's not even one generation yet. So if we're making crops that are genetically modified or fixing human genetic conditions, they've only just started to have kids. People have had these treatments, and so we don't really know the effects that will be passed on. But if we've isolated these genes from other organisms, and they worked in that organism for thousands of years, why wouldn't they work in the new one?
Human body is amazing at filtering out anything bad for us anyway. So if something pops up as being bad for us, then I'll stop eating it. I mean, we all know sweets are bad for us, but we still eat them, right? We don't die from it as long as we eat it in moderation. Genetic engineering has taught us so much about the world around us and even ourselves. We've synthesized the whole entire human genome. The question is, where does all this technology stop? When does technology and ethics collide? So people are starting to wonder about if we can genetically engineer our own children to be smarter, more competitive, stronger. Is that ethical? Is that something we should be spending our time, energy, and technology on? Genetic engineering has allowed us to do so much, from feeding the world to curing disease. It's really opening the door to a lot of opportunities that people have. The general public has a skewed view, in my opinion, of scientists as these evil, money-mongering people in a lab doing everything against nature, but I believe that a lot of scientists are working towards contributing to the Earth and the world and its populations by making more sustainable food production, crops, and of course curing disease, all of these things which plague human society and the world.
So decide for yourself.
But as far as I'm concerned, genetic engineering enables us to live the lifestyle that we want. So unless you're prepared to go back to the Stone Ages where we're fighting disease left and right and unable to grow any crops, you can't take just the bits of GE that you like and depend upon. You have to take it all. It's not as glamorous as it sounds anymore, is it? Then I think you should be kind to genetic engineering because it's given us so much.